This is the third in a series of 6 webinars on B2B SaaS pricing. And today we're going to talk about services in B2B SaaS. The other webinars that we had the previous 2 weeks, the first one was on packaging, and then last week we had on pricing models. And they were sort of what I would call foundational in a sense. So packaging is what you sell, pricing models is sort of how you structure pricing models around that. Both of those webinars, the recordings, including the retake of the recording of last week's webinar where we had the issues, are on the school community. I'll link to that in a second. This webinar will also be on the school community, so full recordings, slides, etc. And then the next 3 webinars. So there's not going to be a webinar next week. I'll be in the US with a client, but then we'll get back here on September 18th, and then 25th, and then October 2nd with first terms and conditions, then expansion and renewals, and then finally on how to run a pricing project. So all of this can be accessed at the school community, which is here. So you go to school.com/SaaS-pricing/about, and that should give you access to you have to apply to be a member, but so far I've let everyone in. I think we're closing in on actually 400 members. So given that it's like 2 weeks old, I think that's a really, really like positive surprise for me. It's a very, I think, strong mix. We have a group of pricing professionals, so people that work directly with pricing, either internally in companies or as consultants. Then we have a lot of product people, we have a lot of commercial people, and then we have founders and CEOs, that's sort of the fourth category, in like a really good mix. So I think, and the experience level is high. So if you have a question or some sort of an issue with pricing or packaging or monetization, that collective brain in the community, they have your answer, right? So I would really just, if you're not already a member, go join. So far it's free. So just go in there and you can access all the webinars and so forth. Okay, so for today's webinar, the plan is to speak for about 30 minutes on the topic of B2B services in B2B SaaS, and then have around 30 minutes of Q&A. So the way that the Q&A is going to work is that you, because of the way Riverside is set up with audience, do not get to speak, but you can use the chat. So the chat is to your right in the web application here. Just write your questions out there, and I will get to them when I get to the Q&A. And then we'll just go through them one by one. If we run out of time, the school community will have an extended discussion where you can run in, you can ask questions, and I will spend some time there over the evening and maybe tomorrow to just make sure that everyone's questions are answered completely. So for the presentation part of the webinar today, I have sort of 4 steps that I want to go through. The first one is why services, and it could almost be called like in defense of services, because I think services are underrated, so I'll speak about that. Then I'll speak about 8 levels of services, so different types of monetization models for services. I'll talk about pricing models, give some examples there. And then I have a 5-step service design process that I want to share with you that I use for my clients. So, and then we'll have the Q&A. So we'll just kick it off with this. So I'll try and full screen this presentation, and then we can go ahead here. Okay, so why services? And I think I want to sort of point to the elephant in the room. And I think that the elephant in the room with regards to services in B2B SaaS is that they're not really liked, right? So whenever you say service revenue to most B2B SaaS people, you get sort of a reaction from almost everyone. And if you sort of unpack that, it has some of the following elements. And the first is that, well, services are low margin, right? So it's like SaaS is really high margin, like close to 100%. Services are not low margin. And it has to be delivered by people, which is, complicated. There's a lot of process and management and so forth involved. Also, it's not really scalable, right? So if you want to build a unicorn or $1 billion enterprise, services are hard to, maybe they are like something that we need to do right now, but sort of like for the vision or the future we have, it's hard for most people to see service as a very integrated part of that. And then further, there's an enterprise value perspective where if a lot of our revenue is built off of low margin delivered by people, not scalable services, that's not recurring, it's ad hoc, it's time material, it's all these things, it's not ARR, then it's not really going to add to the value of the business. It might even, to some extent, extract or detract from it. So that's also an issue. And then I would argue that finally, they're absolutely necessary, right? So you have this issue where most people see services as a necessary evil in some sense. It's like, okay, so, we need to deliver an outcome for the customer, and the software does some of that outcome, but there's essentially a gap or a hole in the middle, and we need to sort of plug that with services, right? So it's like, the software is great, but we need to onboard people for them to use it, so we'll do the onboarding service or whatever it is. And I think that approach is, to an extent, wrong. Or at least you're missing an opportunity if that's sort of your major framework around thinking of services. So I would invite you to perceive it a little bit differently as an opportunity. So imagine that you have two taxi services. We'll call them Taxi A and Taxi B, right? So a taxi is a service, or an Uber, or whatever it is. And then you can have, Taxi A is what I would call a standard service. So Taxi A picks you up at your home and drives you to the airport. That's it. Okay, that is exactly what you would expect from a taxi service, right? It's like, I need to go to the airport, I'll call a cab, they drive me to the airport. Done. 5 out of 5 stars, it did exactly what it was supposed to do, what I intended to, let's say, hire the service for. Okay, Taxi B is different. Taxi B is an extraordinary service. It still picks you up at home, but then it drives you straight to the plane, right? Not to the airport. It actually drives you all the way through the tarmac, like you see on Instagrams where people get their private jets, like straight to the plane. And then it handles all your luggage, like you don't need to touch it. That just gets done. It handles all the paperwork and the security. So all the visas are sort of like magically there. Everybody knows your name when you go through customs and so forth. And then finally, it boards you on the plane, walks you to your seat, right? So it's like, this is where you sit. Everything is nice for you. Have a nice flight. And then magically, the taxi is there when you arrive at your destination to take you that last mile to where you were actually going. Because you aren't going to an airport. Like you're flying to whatever, Miami-Dade, but you're actually going somewhere in Miami. And that's what Taxi B has figured out, and it takes you. So the difference between the two taxis is that you're trying to get the same thing done. Taxi B just does it all for you, where Taxi A gives you a slice of the pie. It gives you a proportion of like 50% of the job to be done, where Taxi B gives you 100% of the job to be done. So usually we have this idea about how services work, which is something like, okay, so I do stuff and that provides value to customers, but also because it's a service, it costs me something to deliver. And mentally, we sort of assume that those two things are relatively aligned, right? So it's like, if I spend 5 hours, I give my customer 5 hours of value in some sense, and I have 5 hours of cost that I need to cover. And, if I put on a margin or a markup on the cost of hours, then, it works out for everyone, and I can do that a little or a lot. That's sort of it. But I think that people miss that this usually is actually only true for a certain part of the job to be done. So if you have some sort of service level from job not done at all, like 0% to job done 100%, I would say that most people see the services as sort of something in the middle of that range. Like, it's somewhere from like the taxi picks you up, but it's a bit late and it's kind of dirty, but it sort of gets the job done. It gets you to the airport, to like, it was a really nice ride and I'll give the Uber driver 5 stars. Like, that's usually the domain or the range of job done that we think services work in between. But actually, if you think about it, the end is very nonlinear. First of all, the first part of cost you give actually doesn't provide any value, because if the taxi just breaks down 1 mile from the airport, you got most of the way there, but it wasn't a good service at all, and the value is 0, because now you need to get another taxi to actually get there. And at the end, Taxi B over delivers towards the job to be done, and that value is tremendously higher. But I would argue that the cost to deliver that extra 5-10% of the complete job actually isn't that much higher. It's linearly higher, but it isn't non-linearly higher. What does scale with value is the difficulty to deliver, actually not the cost. So those extraordinary services don't necessarily cost more to deliver, they're just harder to do because you need to know the customer better and you need to spend more time designing and controlling and developing the specific outcomes that the customer's after. And this is a very key distinction when thinking about services, because most people think, oh, to deliver that sort of taxi B experience, I just need to pour like a ton of money into it, and we can't afford that, so we won't. And instead, you should have a framework around, like, it's just going to be hard. Like, the man hours are going to be the same, but if you really take care and do really exceptionally good work and have really control over our processes, we can actually deliver non-linear value as we scale towards a complete job done for these services. And that's sort of the framework that most things work with. Okay, but it gets even better. And so let's say level 1 of why extraordinary services are better is essentially that you can charge more for them, right? So let's say that you have a SaaS ACV, you charge something for your software, and then the services essentially come on top. So one part is that if you deliver really, really good service, you can charge more for good service. Most people would accept that premise. So fair enough. But I would argue that there's more, and that is that you can actually also charge more for the software. And here's why. So if I do a lot of validation calls where I test new packaging and pricing with my customers, so for their clients, and I think in 4 out of 5 of these validation calls, customers specifically ask about onboarding. Like, okay, sounds like a great solution. How's the onboarding? And the reason I think that onboarding has such a big piece of real estate in customers' mind is that onboarding is a high determining factor in the probability of whether you're actually going to deliver the value that you promise you'll deliver in the solution, right? So if I have a really good piece of software, but I'm onboarded poorly, I won't get the value. But if I have just a medium piece of software, but I'm onboarded really well, I will at least get that medium value, right? So it takes the risk out of the software solution, which means that I'm actually willing to pay more for it because my expected value of the solution increases when I have good services available to me. So you're able to charge for it twice. You're able to charge for both the premium service that works really well, but it actually also increases the willingness to pay for the underlying solution. Okay, it gets even better, because what will also happen is that when you have this premium service level, usually customers will tend to expand faster, right? They will buy new modules or upgrade to a new tier or get an add-on or add more integrations or do whatever it is from a functionality perspective or add more users quicker or faster than they otherwise would have, right? So expansion revenue, net revenue retention goes up. And since they now are adopted more and they like the service better and they're paying more for it, their lifetime value will also go up because the retention increases, the churn drops. So you get this three-dimensional expansion of the customer lifetime value, where both the price, the ACV increases, and the number, or let's say the volume of product increases, and they stay for longer. So if the customer lifetime value is the volume of the cubes we have here, it is no exaggeration that really good service can be a 400 to 800% difference in the customer lifetime value with the same software solution. Like, interface the same, integration is the same, functionality is the same, does the same thing. But just by adding that extra service, now I'm actually have an increased likelihood of being able to charge full value for it. They adopt faster, they stay longer, everything else gets better. Now you can also spend more in the acquisition cost, acquiring the customers, and so forth. So, recap of why services. They increase the willingness to pay of themselves and the software solution. They drive functionality expansion. That is more modules. They drive volume expansion. So on the metric, more users, more API calls, more whatever stores covered, whatever it is that your software does. It reduces churn. And finally, it actually also tends to increase conversion rate. Like, the likelihood that I'll buy something that has really solid service is just higher than if it doesn't, right? Because I know that I'm onboarded better and so forth. So this is just like my attempt at like a sales pitch for services overall that I really truly believe in. And it's one of, especially in B2B SaaS, one of the things that I most often add in and add in with some care in order to just create commercial transformation. Okay, with that, I'll go through the 8 levels of services that I see. Number 1 is free services, right? So this is just things that you do for your customer, but you don't charge them, right? So there's no cash. It's not a question of whether they're buying it or not because they're getting it for free. So you're just doing it for them. And there's no pricing model because it's free, and hence there's no margin, or let's say the margin is 0%. And there's no revenue model. Like, it's not ad hoc, it's not recurring revenue, it's just not revenue, right? So this is a very early stage companies doing everything for everyone. I was speaking to a CS leader from like a 5 million AR company that I'm working with earlier today. She has about 16 people. They are doing most of their service and support for their clients. They have about 500 clients for free. Like, she's in that category. We're working with her I'm working with her to change that. Okay, that's level 1. That everybody does that to some extent. Okay, level 2 is time material, right? I do an hour of work, I send you an invoice for an hour of work. Like, pretty standard, right? Cash comes after delivery. Customers can usually choose whether or not they want to buy this. The pricing, the model is based on time spent. The margin is usually fixed, and the revenue is not recurring, so it's ad hoc. Like, everybody knows this model. We just want to point out that it exists. Okay, third model is scoped. So scoped is now where the customer says, hey, I want you to do this for me. How many hours is it going to take? And then you say something like 30. And then now cash, at least some of it can come before the fact. So you can say, oh, and of the 30, I'll invoice you 15 now, half. And then, if I spend 25, I'll only invoice the 10. If I spend 40, I'll invoice, 25 more. So the margin is still fixed, pricing is still time-based, it's usually optional, revenue is still ad hoc. Model 4 is scoped fixed price. Now we need to have a little bit of change in the monetization model here, because fixed price is the same piece of work. Now you just guarantee the 30 hours. You're saying, we're going to do the version update or whatever it is, and it's going to be 30 hours, and that's the fixed price. Great. Now a few things can happen. One, you can actually charge all of it up front if you want, because it's not going to change. It's not going to be more or less than 30. So the price is now known before the fact, which means that it can be charged as in advance. You can, with this, because it is fixed, hence known, actually make it a non-optional for the customer. Let's say every year you must update the version, or every year you must have this training session for your people, or every year, whatever it is. So, but it is not something that you can opt out of. So it's just like, we're just going to let you know that this is a line item when we charge. Pricing, however, still time-based, but margin is now flexible because you can do it faster than the 30 hours. So one of my clients, they do a annual version update. They charge them, I think it's actually 20 hours they charge them, but they usually spend 2 hours doing it. So actually they have a really, really solid margin on this. The revenue is, again, ad hoc, so non-recurring. 5 is prepaid ad hoc. So this would be the case where the customer buys 100 hours up front, pays you in advance, then they have the 100 hours, they spend them on whatever things they need to have work done on. When they run out of hours, they have to buy 100 more. So this is a very sort of widely used model, actually along with the other ones. It has the cash flow advantages of always being upfront, but still choice model, pricing, margin, and revenue are essentially as time material. Credits is let's say advanced version of prepaid ad hoc, because that's actually prepaid on a subscription. And this is the first model we have where services turn into ARR. And it works like this. Every time period, 3 months, 1 year, whatever, I buy a chunk of hours. It could also be a chunk of support calls, whatever. But it would be something like, I buy 100 hours every 3 months. And then next 3 months, I have to pay for another 100, another 100, another 100. And we now have terms and conditions in place that say these 100 hours, if not spent, will roll over. So they will accrue in your account and you can just spend them later. And there are different sort of license terms that you can put in place on how to control this and so forth. But if you let them rot and you spend them on a FIFO principle, and there's different sort of other accounting measures, you can have it turn into ARR. And I've had this tested both in GAAP accounting and IFRS. 7 is capacity. So this is the case where you provide a capacity or resource in terms of people. It could be 5 developers on a team, it could be something else, that are at the 100% disposal of the customer. They then pay for them as if they were working full time on that account, but it is up to that customer to then give them work. Like, so if they have 5 developers and they don't send anything at them, or they don't actually scope their work, they will just sit there. So I have a friend, he runs I think 80 people, 80 consulting service, a PS division of a large insurtech company. And he has 110% of billable hours, meaning that he invoices some people twice because they're on capacity. So they're on capacity with his large clients. The clients don't actually give them work. So he actually gets them to work on something else in the meantime, like time and material work, scoped open-ended somewhere else. And then he actually gets to invoice the same person 2 times in the same time period. And finally, we have what I call service concepts. So service concepts is different from the other ones in that, let's say, the basic example we have is premium support. So it's something like, I promise you this outcome. We're not talking about how much time I spend giving you the outcome. I'm just saying that the outcome is going to be X, or you have access to Y, or we're going to get C done. We can charge you before the fact. It can both be optional and non-optional. So for example, premium support sometimes is non-optional for enterprise accounts and so forth. We can price it based on value, which means that margins are flexible, and we can definitely book it as ARR, right? So this is just one of the more powerful things to do. And usually what happens is that people, whenever they have services, they sort of level up. Like, it's like they start at level 1, they just do things, and then they start charging. And then sometimes they do, like we'll do prepaid, or we'll do like scope projects sometimes. And then they will work towards different models where service concepts by far tend to be the most profitable ones overall, especially for B2B SaaS. And I'll give you an example here. So I had a customer, this is a few years back. They were engineers. They were doing big IoT projects within wastewater. They had a piece of software that controlled water facilities. And then what we did was we said, hey, let's actually bundle this in together with services, almost like a managed service concept, where we're doing a lot of what you're already doing, but instead of now counting hours, which would be like, they say, like an a la carte model, we're just saying, hey, this isn't all you can eat, but these are the specific things that we will do and not do. And that's what you have over here on the right with the ongoing service concept, where we say, hey, we have access to your solution. We will be reactive, so you can reach out and we'll give you sparring and advice whenever you want it, right? But we will also be proactive, where we will monitor the thing, we will optimize the thing, we will reach out and have discussions with you on the strategy of the thing and work with you over time to improve the efficiency and the economics of your water facility. And then all the bespoke stuff that you have going on, we will maintain it and keep it up to date and so forth. And so the interesting thing with this concept, and it's just one example, I've done it many times before, is that we could actually sell the SaaS and service bundle at plus 600%, so almost 7 times the price of the previous SaaS only product that had PS on the side. And then usually and that's just from a like net revenue perspective, was just way more money. But then the worry inside the company was, but then all the PS is going to go away, because now they have the service concept, so they don't have to buy the PS hours, so we're actually going to lose out. But what happened was that because we had a much closer interaction with the client through the service concept, actually they found other things to buy. So actually the PS spend increased as well with the accounts, because we now had more, let's say, at bat. We simply had more meetings. We simply had more things to point out. So we were able to paint a picture with more value in it, because we were more engaged with the client. And these things were not included in the Control service concept. So just say, hey, of all the things we're doing for you that you're really happy about because it works, we're also pointing out these other ways in which we could help you. And that now becomes the new PS spend. So it's just one example of how a service concept can really elevate a SaaS solution. Pricing models for these things. And I see that we have a few sort of questions ongoing in the chat. That's awesome, guys. Just keep it going. And I think we're up close to 80 people here. So yeah, that's it. Okay, so when I talk pricing models in the service concepts, I'm just going to focus in on this little square here. We're saying all of these 8 levels are time-based except the last one, which is value-based. So service concepts are not tied to a unit of time. They're tied to the value or the outcome that we're delivering. So I'll just illustrate this with a simple premium support example. So what I see a lot of time is that people try to say, hey, premium support is just almost like a prepaid, scoped kind of thing. So they're trying to turn it into like a level like 3 or 4 type service instead of having it as a level 8. And the way they do it is they say, hey, we're going to spend up to 20 hours a month on you, and then we can do any task. So it almost becomes just like, oh, I'm just going to buy a time bank and we're just going to call it premium support and we can charge, $3,000 a month for it because, that usually would be like $150 per hour, and that makes sense. That's sort of the logic that the customer would walk into. But if you take that same premium support and say, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to have unlimited hours, but we're going to define a specific outcome for you or a specific, let's say, white list of tasks that we will do for you. So it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet versus an a la carte menu. But, if you want to eat like 1 million pizza slices, that's great. But the other services that we have, let's say the drinks, I don't know if you follow the analogy here, are not included, right? So you'll just scope out a specific set of activities that you can do. Let's say anything that a super user can do in the system, you can call premium support and they will do for you, right? But bespoke development, that's outside of it, whatever it is. Just draw a line in the sand, make it clear and understandable to the customer, and then charge for that. And that actually can be charged with a different model. So you can say, hey, we're just going to charge, let's say, €2 per employee because all your employees can call and activate the service. And maybe there's 15,000 employees. So now suddenly you're charging 30,000 for premium support B, which is a service concept, compared to premium support A, which is just like a covered up prepaid model. So this is essentially the kind of gymnastics mentally that you have to walk in through. Here's a list of like usual suspects in terms of service concepts that I very often deploy with my clients. Premium support is one. The commercial SLA is another favorite. That's essentially, so you want to use your contract framework and you want to have your SLA and you want to have your payment schedule, dear customer. That's great. We will actually supply that, but we call that a commercial SLA, meaning that we now have to set up a different SOP to handle you and so forth. And that is actually an increase of the ACV, the total contract value of, let's say, 10%. I have sold this to government customers through RFPs and tenders. I've sold it to defense contractors. I've sold it to sort of regular B2B. I've sold it to banks. It works. Any kind of regulatory reporting often can be put into a service concept as well. Premium SLAs, specifically, especially technical SLAs, can be put into here. Some sort of data management or update or monitoring can also be handled here. If you have ongoing like handling of client employees, like recurring onboarding or training, these kinds of things can be done here. I'm actually scoping a training library with ongoing training sessions as a service concept for one of my clients right now. Integration management, like just setting up integrations, managing, maintaining them. Usually they're split into standard integrations and bespoke integrations, but work the same way. They pay for the onboarding and then they pay, let's say, per integration for upkeeping it. And then any sort of managed services that usually is just an extension of the underlying pricing model of the software, just more expensive. So those are the different pricing models that can be deployed overall. But get creative, but just make sure that if you have a service concept, to base it on the actual value output. Okay, designing services. So this is so I want to offer a premium support to my customers. How do I figure out what should be inside of it and what shouldn't be inside of it? Or I want to, like the regulatory reporting thing sounded interesting. How do I actually do it? 5 easy steps. Step number 1 is get a great idea for a job the customer wants done, meaning that you need to understand that there has to be some sort of demand and willingness to pay for a thing. Like if customers don't want to get to the airport, you can't supply the taxi service to get there, right? So it's like, it just needs to be centered around a job to be done. Like they need X done and they are willing to spend money for it. Like that's what you tap into. So step 2 is get a customer on the phone and start making promises, right? And usually salespeople love this step. Like, oh, I can make promises. That's great. So like it will sound something like, we will take you to the airport, directly to the plane, and we'll carry your luggage and we'll handle the passports and we'll, just do all these. Even though you haven't really figured out how to deliver all this yet. And I know this sounds daunting, right? But what you're doing here is you're trying to solve for revenue. You're trying to use the engagement and the conversation with the customer to figure out what is it that I have to give you that matches the job to be done. You have the outcome you want so that you're willing to pay me money, right? So it's like you need to sort of find that point of traction where they say, oh, that's awesome, I want that. And then you're good, right? So just pile on until you reach that point. And then step 3, charge lots of money, right? So, oh, taxi service B, super expensive, right? Taxi A, like $50 to get to the airport. Taxi B, $5,000. Like literally, it can be 100 times more because of course it's like luxury, it's bespoke service, like we're doing all sorts of things, all this, right? So be sure to charge for it when you deliver the premium support. This is what pays for all the promises, right? If you just make the promises, but make it really affordable on non-premium, unit economics won't pan out. So charge lots of money. 4, like you just made a lot of promises, you have the money, figure out to use the one to solve the other, right? You scramble to deliver. And then over time, then you notice what parts of all the promises in the delivery that the customer actually cares about and what they care less about. And what they care less about, you cut out. You say, okay, next time I sell this, I'm not going to promise the passport thing because they don't want that anyways, whatever it is, right? So you're just going to say, I'm now going to decrease the, let's say, liability or the delivery I have while keeping the value intact. This is sort of like an 80-20 principle. So usually there's something like, oh, I can actually like cut 80% of the work and then, just have 20% left, but that's actually going to deliver 80% of the value. So that's awesome, like really good trade-offs. But that's the trade-off that you can only really find out once it is already sold and once the service is already experienced. So this happens after the sale, sort of in the operational bit of delivering it. And then 5 is you optimize what is left, right? So the 20% that are actually left in your service that the customer really does care about, those you then charge to scale. You say, okay, so how can we process this? How can we, have code do some of the work, whatever it is? How can we make it faster, cheaper, more efficient? All these things, and then you can actually scale the service. So in 5 steps, it looks like this: define the desirable outcome, solve it 100%, like make promises, charge for the value, cut the unnecessary delivery, and then optimize the delivery. And that's it. And then the principle being solve for revenue first, top line, make sure that the hockey stick in the value delivery is there, and then margin second. Like don't worry if costs follow and skyrocket because you can get the costs down through the last steps once you iterate on this. So points to observe here is solve for revenue first, margin second, just cover that. Second is it tends to take about 2 to 4 sales cycles to get right? So, and this is actually, so I use sales cycles here because it sort of scales with ACV, but it's like you need to have a sales cycle where you make promises, maybe 2, and then you actually get some sales and you start to deliver some services, and then you improve them, you learn, and then you have a few more sales cycles until you're sort of set. And that's about it. And this is if you work hard at it, right? But just for reference, if your sales cycle is 3 months, like set off a year to get your premium support and your regulatory reporting and whatever else thing you have correctly into the market. And just know that up until then, it's just going to be hard and the margins aren't going to be good. But in the end, they will be awesome. 3, make money on the product, meaning the service concept, not the individual customer. So what's going to happen if you have a premium onboarding, like with white gloves and everything, is that if you onboard 100 customers, then overall, if you charge, let's say, whatever, $10,000 for each of the customers, then you're going to make $1 million. 1 or 2 or 3 few individual customers are going to cost you more than the 10K to deliver. They're going to cost you 50K because they're different and they didn't fit in and they didn't do XYZ. That's okay. The intuition for most people is to start to safeguard the product. Oh no, we'll not do more than 100 hours, or, we'll put this in brackets where we'll say, to be determined or scoped. We'll do all the, and what they're doing is that they're taking away from the original value proposition. They're reducing the overall value. They're reducing the demand. They're reducing the willingness to pay. They're reducing all these things so that less customers will buy it, or they will be more skeptical when doing so, in order to protect themselves against the few outliers that are unprofitable. And I think this is a wrong state of mind to have when you deliver services. You should be okay with losing money on a few of them, as long as the overall concept is profitable, very profitable, right? And that's just part of it, right? So when I deliver services to my clients and projects, what's going to happen is that, I'm going to charge a fixed fee, and over 20 accounts or 20 projects, I'm doing very well, but one or two of them are just going to be, pardon my French, a pain in the backside to deliver, because maybe external consequences, maybe something happened with the client, whatever. But I still deliver my fees based on fixed upfront and performance bonus, and that's how it's going to go. Because overall, across projects, that's the right model. But if I try to safeguard against, scope creep or any of the sort with all of my clients, they would buy less, and I would have less good of an outcome globally across everything. Finally, recognize the true risk here. And the true risk with regards to services is that you are going to under-deliver on the value, right? So the true risk is that you are going to be so careful not to have too high costs that you're going to miss out on the hockey stick in value, because you're just going to underinvest in it. And really, the cost of omission, not doing it, is really what you're paying. Even though it never shows up in your P&L, that's the real loss, versus just having a harder time with some existing customers that needs to be sold in a different way and delivered in a different way, which is maybe hard short-term conversations where somebody needs to pay for something they aren't used to paying for, but now they have to. So, because what's going to happen is that if you start to deliver premium services, extraordinary services, taxi B services, customer lifetime value is going to go up, retention is going to go up, expansion is going to go up, everything is going to go up, meaning that you now have more cash on hand per customer to deliver value to those customers. That is a positive feedback loop. You can spend more to acquire the customers, you can spend more to deliver the customers, and you will still have more left over for your own bottom line. And that is a long-term happy customer now being over-delivered on value compared to the alternative where you try to save on services and hence save on value and never get that exponential sort of cube outcome on the CLTV. Okay, that was it. I think I got it done in around 35 minutes. Time for Q&A. While you type out your questions, and I see that we have a lot in the chat here, I just want to notice one thing. One, I think the internet actually held up pretty well. So, win for my new connection. That's great. Two, the recording of this webinar, including the questions, will be on the skool.com community. So it's skool.com/SaaS-pricing/about. That's the page where you can apply to become a member. It's like 3 questions. It's really easy. I'll let you in unless you are like really weird, but I'll let you in. We have 350 members. Go there. The discussion is great. As I said, the collective brain can answer any question. This is also where you can find the calendar for the next webinars, and you can find everything else. I have some extra pretty amazing, I think, goodies in there. So do that. If you want to buy my book or follow my YouTube channel or LinkedIn, those are the links. Okay, questions. So we have a pretty long list here, and I'll just start from the top here. So SS asks, the services that are ARR, we'll just find it here. Okay, has to be renewable? ? Correct? ? I haven't seen services treated as ARR in the past. Interesting. Yeah. So the idea is, if you have a contract to deliver something and they have to pay you until canceled, then it's a recurring revenue, right? So saying, hey, this is just me showing up, doing the thing. And then I'll keep showing up and do the thing until you tell me not to. That is recurring revenue. So what I'm pointing out is that what everybody's focused on is the delivery method. piece of software, person doing something. Doesn't matter. It's the contract that determines whether something is a recurring revenue or not. Like, what are the terms under which this is bought? This being something that happens, right? If you keep making it happen, then you can keep invoicing them and they will keep having to keep paying you, right? So that's the process here. Second question, Carsten asks, from a capacity planning perspective, the prepaid credits model seemed challenging when clients roll too many credits into the following period. Any thoughts on this? Yeah, so first of all, consumption actually tends to go up with a prepaid credit model, right? Because psychologically what happens when people prepay for a number of hours is that they now spend them as though they were free. Meaning, oh, I already paid for this, so I might as well spend them. So let's say that somebody pays for 1,000 hours and they do that January 1st. Around October, you can call them and say, hey, you still have 600 hours left. Like, why don't we spend them on something? Don't you have anything that we need to work on? And they will come up with stuff for you, right? In some of the other, let's say, lower level models, that would have been a sale for you, right? You'd have to say, why don't we work on this? And they would say, well, we don't have budget for it, and like all that. But if it's the prepaid model, like the budget is already gone, so they'll just like get to work with the work. So usually consumption actually increases. So that's sort of point number one. Point number two is that over time, 2, 3, 4 years, you will have to find the right volume of credits. So if you oversell them, like you sell them 1,000 hours and they just only need 500, right? That will be apparent after a while. Like, so what I usually do is I do what I call a transposed model, where saying, for year 2, I'm only going to sell you as many hours as you actually spend in year 1. So if I sold you 1,000 in year 1, but you only spent 500, in year 2, I'm only going to renew you for 500, right? So the 500 that you didn't use roll over, so I still have 1,000, right? But I'm not going to have 1,500. And then maybe, next year you spend 700. So now you actually sort of roll over, you start to renew at 700 and so forth. Over time, 25 years, you're only going to be off by what the original amount was off, like the original 500. It's just like if you spreadsheet it out, that's what's going to happen in all the scenarios. So that's a really easy model to sort of follow this along. The third thing, is that you need to have the credits at some point expire or rot. And usually a good time period, this is a little bit different in GAAP accounting, like US-based accounting, and IFRS, which is like international accounting, like EU and most of Asia. But the compromise is 2 years. IFRS you can do 3, but the compromise is, a credit has to be spent within 24 months of it being bought, or it is gone, it vanishes. That's a compromise in that, on one hand, it's long enough for most customers to accept that the risk is very low and they will spend it. But also it's short enough so that your CFO can recognize the revenue and have it actually booked in the P&L and have it as recurring revenue. So it's sort of one of those things. And this is also why you need I call it the FIFO principle. That's an accounting principle that says, in which order am I expending the inventory? And FIFO stands for first in, first out, meaning that the oldest credit that you have gets spent first, right? So I can actually have sort of a rolling surplus of credits as long as no credit is older than 24 months. That usually takes care of it. So that's sort of, I think those are the comments, Carsten, to this model here. But I mean, if you're way off, you oversell the customer, you're going to have some version of this that is real. But otherwise, I think these 3 usually take care of it. Okay, Philip then asks, is it ever problematic that there is clearly a potential for some hours are going to be charged but end up not productive for the client? What do we do if they push back? I don't know what you're referring to here, Philip. So is that in one of the service levels, or so maybe re-ask the question before I just start like going off on a tangent here. So if you can be a little bit more specific with that question, that would be great. Michael asks, what's your experience of measuring the outcomes from model 8? So measuring outcomes, of course, is a different thing. So sometimes they're tied to outcomes of something else. So for example, premium support is sort of tied to the outcome of the overall solution. So it's like, what is the outcome of the software solution that you're buying if it worked really well for you? Like if you had super adoption and super users and everything was smooth, like that's the value. And then the premium support just plugs the gap between works sort of well to works really well, right? So that would be that. For others, you can of course sort of run it back to what kind of costs customer would have to do it themselves. Let's say some of the data management services, some of the integration services, the regulatory reporting. I had different examples where conceivably the customer could do these things. It would just be greater if you did them. But other than that, you can just, the outcome, because we're packaging the service around a job to be done, the outcome should almost be pre-given. Like they are already searching for an outcome. They're already searching for the reporting to be done, for the data to be managed, for the integrations to be like out of sight, out of mind, whatever it is. And then that's actually the value that you're building inside of the service. So if you ever feel that you really have to defend or argue or any of the sort an outcome or value of an outcome, one of two things is happening. Either you don't have a job to be done and you're just trying to sell them service and they don't really understand it, so they're trying to interview you for it. That could be one thing. So that's that. Or you're speaking to procurement. So if you're speaking to procurement, just, do your best. I think that's a longer conversation of how to handle the procurement pressure, but you can just say, hey, the business line that's buying this, they get it, right? And I don't have to defend the value that is here. You can think of it as like insurance. Like premium support is like an insurance. You're insuring yourself against, loss of potential value in the solution, right? That's the outcome. I'm happy to do a business case for you overall. I'll refer you to the business case of the overall purchase of whatever it is, but do not necessarily fall for the trick that you need to defend the outcome, especially if they're trying to push you into like a price per hour or cost type framework for this sort of thing. That would be sort of, I hope that answers the question here. Johnny then asks, a value-based service or implementation done for you has to be associated with a time limit. Okay, so one aspect actually, Johnny, that I didn't mention that much is that you need to distinguish between services that are one-off and services that are recurring, right? So the only way in which an ARR service makes sense is if the service is recurring, like if it actually happens repeatedly over time and forever. So onboarding, you can have onboarding as a fixed project, fixed scope, but you can't have it in what I call a service concept, right? So again, and then you say a value-based service or implementation done for you has to be associated with time limit ? Not necessarily, right? So we're getting back to make money on the product, not the customer. So if I onboard 100 customers and 2 or 3 of them has no time limit, like at one point you have the opportunity to say, I don't want to deliver this contract to you. Like, go to hell. I don't want to sell it to you anymore. And we're just going to stop here. Or you can just deliver these few customers at a loss while you still make money overall on the concept. I think that's sort of, so what you're doing here is you're trying to sort of safeguard you against a margin loss on individual accounts because you have scope creep and you have difficult customers and all that. And I think actually you need to take a step back and saying, hey, like if I put in place time limits, how would it devalue my entire proposition against my whole market? And is that worth it, right? And usually it's not, right? So you just need to make the smarter choice, just accept the few clients that are loss making and then move on, knowing that you're better off with this more extraordinary service sold in market to everyone. Okay, we have Mary asking, what would usually happen if the outcome is not met? Should we refund or discount? What if it's beyond our control, for example, some macroeconomic situations? So it of course depends on what the outcome is, right? So I'll give you an example. So when I do projects for clients, I say, okay, so what's your situation? Okay, so you have 100 million ARR and, and we'll ask some questions and then we'll figure out that we sort of think that maybe we could increase that by 50% due to whatever, historical reasons and enterprise clients not being monetized, whatever it is. So what I'll say, okay, so we agree that it is reasonable for us to expect that a successful project executed well within whatever, how we agree to do the work, could increase, ARR by 50%. And then we agree on that. And then I just say, my fee is based on a reasonable proposition based on that. I have a fee that is fixed, and then I have one that is outcome based. So I tie my fee to that to make sure that like it's a win-win or lose-lose. But that's sort of it. So what you don't do is you don't necessarily promise an outcome, meaning in the sense that you guarantee it. That's different. You can still price based on an outcome as long as it is believable and likely, right? So if the customer says, and often actually, if taxi B does everything that it was supposed to do, except like a small thing, people will still consider like an awesome service, right? So even though it didn't like completely took you to the airplane, like maybe you had to walk like 100 feet to the airplane, it's like, great, I still like the ride, everything else was great. They're going to forgive you for like small transgressions and glitches in the delivery, as long as overall it is an extraordinary experience. So I think those would be my sort of main comments to that, is that if you overall deliver and don't guarantee an outcome, that's different from just targeting an outcome that you agree is realistic here, and they have believability in that you delivering it, then that's enough. With that said, if you absolutely fall flat on your face and you're not able to meet deadlines, and you know the project just goes to rock bottom, you can offer a discount, or you can even better just offer it entirely for free and just work your backside off to deliver and then make amends with the customer. But that is sort of almost like salvaging or damage controlling. So that is fine, but that is more something unexpected happens. So I think the main concept that you're looking for here is that there is a difference between guarantees and pricing based on outcomes. Ron, Scrappy, love it. Perfect. Thank you. Casey says, revenue first, margin second. Great way to prioritize. In your experience, what kind of pushback do you see from the executives with these principles, if any? So I'm understanding the question here. If I present this to a client, what kind of pushback am I getting here? So one is that it is the process that I'm mapping out, right? So this process, seems it has like a gap where we don't know what's going on, right? So between we sell it and we have optimized it, we have like a time period, I said 2 to 4 sales cycles, where we really don't know if we're making money or losing money, right? Even if we have a great top line, we might just be like, it's called scramble to deliver. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, and the people who have to do the delivery, they don't like to do the scramble. Like they want to have incremental control. So they would rather like make a small promise and then deliver on that, and then make a slightly larger promise and then deliver on that. And you just need to like flip that on its head and say, hey, we need to work like from the top down here, instead of doing incremental improvements on the service, because we need to solve for the revenue first. So usually I'll get someone like CEO, kind of needs to sort of understands the risk parameters here, but generally likes it. Chief of sales generally loves it. Like, oh, this is great. I just have more like stuff to sell. This is going to be awesome. Chief of delivery, like CS delivery teams, hate it, but can be brought along. Like you need to sort of paint the timeline and the picture and all these things and say, hey, because the promise for them usually is that, oh, you can become a real revenue center. Like instead of just being like this lousy cost center that everybody hates and you're sort of doing like taxi A type stuff, you can become like really like revenue champions inside the company and stars, right? And really help drive stuff. But you need to have the really, really hard delivery, and you need to go through this period of low margins and scrambling in order to get there. But if you can get that narrative right, usually they will come along for the ride. Steven asks, where does customer success typically fit into your service concepts framework? Okay, so customer success as a function get to deliver some of these things. So sometimes depends a little bit on how you split these functions. Sometimes I actually see support. The really split function is like onboarding people separated from support people, separated from customer success people, separated from professional services people. Like, and sometimes they're just one unit, and sometimes they're like any combination of the four, right? But if you have like a regular CS function that they account manage, they do the renewals, they help, they're at least part of the onboarding to a large extent, then they get to own some of these products. So for example, if I do packaging and pricing for someone, like let's say for a client, and we say, okay, so we have like a tiered model, which is whatever, basic, advanced, enterprise, and then we have like add-ons and so forth. Oh, and we also need premium support and whatever regulatory reporting services. It would often happen that, okay, so product now gets spun out and they need to figure out the feature composition and the delivery for like the modules and the tiers. Premium support, that's probably CS that's going to deliver that. So they have to sit down and figure out what that actually means, I have some frameworks for these things. Regulatory reporting services might be CS, might be the professional service division that needs to do this, whatever it is. Maybe development can sort of figure out a way to do it automatically, but in any case, the division that has to do the delivery has to also define the methodology and the functionality and the scope and all these things. And then you need to sort of come back together into the group, head of product, head of CS, head of sales, like figure out, okay, this is still attractive and sellable, and we can command high prices for this, and we can explain it, and we can market it, and we can do all these things. Let's go, right? So so that's it, right? And then they own that. And of course, CS also has a very important role in actually driving sort of all the upsells and the expansion and so forth. So they actually usually, sometimes services are sold on the front end, like in the initial sales, and sometimes they're sold on the back end as people are like evolving in the product, and then CS has a large role as the sellers of those added on services. So they become part of the expansion. I hope that makes sense. Robert loves Steve's question. That's great. I loved it too. Ron, +1 to Steven's question. Steven, you're a star. Great question. Maybe I should have spent more time on it. Okay, but that's it. Okay. In any case, guys, I think we have 5 or 6 more questions. I am going to copy these and then go into the school community. So again, school.com/SaaS-pricing/about will give you access to the community. We are 350 plus members. I will answer the remaining questions in the chat in there. That's also where the recording is going to be. That's also where the slides are going to be. That's also where the recordings and the slides for the 2 previous webinars are going to be. And that's also where the recordings and slides for the next webinars are going to be. So, final reminder, the next webinar is going to be in 2 weeks on September 18th. Then there's going to be 1 week until we do expansion, revenue, renewals. And then the final webinar will be on October 2nd on how to run a B2B SaaS pricing project. Awesome to have you here, guys. I'm grateful for all the attention and the really good questions and the engagement here. Keep that up. I hope to see you on the inside in the school community. So, but for now, over and out. Thank you for the webinar. Thank you for today. Take care and see you in 2 weeks. Cheers.